New top cop. President Trump announces his pick to lead the FBI, one day before the man he fired heads to Capitol Hill. Terror in Tehran. ISIS militants killed a dozen people in the first major attack by the group in the Shiite nation. Sanctuary cities.
This country is free. This country enjoys its liberties because we're a nation based on the rule of law.
One senator's bill to discourage cities that refuse to comply with the federal immigration law. And an appeal from Pope Francis. The Holy Father wants you to pray tomorrow to help the world. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, June 7th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. As former FBI Director James Comey prepares to give his first public account of the events leading up to his firing, the president announced his pick to replace him. President Trump makes his selection public as Congress continues its investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. We're learning what James Comey will say tomorrow when he testifies before Congress. In remarks released this afternoon, Comey says President Trump sought his loyalty in private meetings. Comey was overseeing the investigation into possible ties between Trump's campaign and Russia. That has outraged Democrats who remain suspicious today.
I think it's more than a little bit curious that the president chose this morning as the time to announce his new FBI head, who, by the way, I understand has got a pretty good reputation.
President Trump may be counting on that reputation in announcing his nominee, Christopher Wray, almost a month after telling FBI Director James Comey, "You're fired." Today, Trump calls Wray a fierce guardian of the law and model of integrity. Speaker of the House Paul Ryan says Wray is the perfect choice.
Someone with a deep bench of experience, he certainly seems to fit that bill.
Meanwhile, Congress grilled senior members of the president's national security team as part of an ongoing probe on Russian meddling in the election.
Director Coates, you've said as well that it would be inappropriate to answer a simple question about whether the president asked for your assistance in blunting the Russia investigation.
I have never felt pressure to intervene or interfere in any way and shaping intelligence.
I have never been directed to do anything I believe to be illegal, immoral, unethical, or inappropriate.
As for Christopher Wray, Trump's pick for FBI director, one national security expert says he shouldn't get much opposition.
Yeah, I think this is a relatively safe and more conventional pick, not necessarily someone with quite the breadth of experience or portfolio of some of his predecessors, but someone with years of experience heading the criminal division at the Department of Justice.
Wray currently works in private practice. He was New Jersey Governor Chris Christie's lawyer during an investigation into the George Washington Bridge lane closing case. Republicans in the Senate could confirm Wray with 51 votes. Lauren?
The media is calling tomorrow's hearing Washington's Super Bowl. Now that we have Comey's prepared remarks, what can we expect?
The former director's testimony details several meetings and phone calls with the president after the election. Comey will describe a February 14th meeting when Comey says Trump told him, quote, "I hope you can let this go." Republicans are expected to press Comey on why he did not raise his concerns publicly or resign.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. President Trump flies to Cincinnati to plug his health care bill and criticizes Democrats reluctant to replace Obamacare.
Obamacare was one of the biggest broken promises in the history of politics. Remember, you can keep your doctor, you can keep your plan. Didn't work out that way.
The president met with small business owners impacted by rising health care costs. He says it will only get worse if Congress fails to act.
These projects not only opened new lanes of commerce, but inspired the immigration and the dreams of millions and millions of people.
President Trump also talks about repairing the nation's crumbling roads and bridges. The president says he's pushing for a plan to pay for infrastructure improvements with $200 billion in tax breaks that he hopes will leverage $1 trillion worth of construction. The United States House unanimously passes a bill to help persecuted Christians and other religious minorities in Iraq and Syria. Those countries are home to some of the most ancient Christian communities. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi has more on the bill. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Even though the United States government has already pumped more than $1 billion into the humanitarian crisis in Iraq, the sponsors of this bill say that money is not reaching Christians and Yazidis, and those groups are speaking out about the genocide devastating their communities.
Haider Elias is a member of the Yazidi faith. The Islamic State killed his brother.
Well, I feel devastated when I first heard. I was actually on the phone with him like 5 minutes prior to him being killed.
ISIS has also targeted and killed countless Christians in Iraq.
The majority of the Christian population has left, and we are really becoming an endangered species in Iraq.
In fact, it's estimated there were more than 1 million Christians in Iraq in 2002. Now that number is between 100 and 200,000. But Representative Chris Smith of New Jersey says money from the U.S. government is not getting to Christians.
They're desperate. They need our humanitarian assistance. In 2017, we'll spend $2.4 billion for the humanitarian needs of people in the Middle East, in refugee camps. Why aren't the Christians getting it? Why are they being bypassed?
Last night, the House passed a bill sponsored by Representative Smith to make sure U.S. funding actually goes to Christians and Yazidis.
Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
The leader of the Knights of Columbus says the unanimous support is significant.
ISIS has made quite clear one of their great goals is to eliminate the religious minorities from the region, particularly the Christians. And so Congress last night, by passing this bill, said, no, you're not going to achieve that goal. We are going to provide the emergency assistance, the aid, to make sure that these communities live.
Democrat co-sponsor Anna Eshoo says the State Department wasn't allowing U.S. dollars to go to church groups. So this bill changes that. And Lauren, as you know from your time in Iraq, the Chaldean Catholic Archdiocese of Erbil is helping many of the Christian victims.
And there are many of them who were fleeing ISIS. Jason, is the bill expected to get the same bipartisan support in the Senate?
The Senate moves a lot slower than the House, but Representative Smith and Mr. Anderson from the Knights of Columbus both said they're urging the Senate to pick it up.
Correspondent Jason Calvi at the Capitol. Thank you, Jason. ISIS claims responsibility for a stunning pair of attacks in Iran's capital. Investigators say 12 are dead and dozens more are injured. National security correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee has a response from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert is condemning the twin attacks, saying the U.S. offers its thoughts and prayers. The U.S. says the depravity of terrorism has no place in a peaceful, civilized world.
This video captures the moment a bomb exploded in Tehran, Iran's capital. At the same time, 4 gunmen armed with rifles and explosives stormed the country's parliament building, with a session in progress. This man says he was in a taxi near the building when police turned him away. That's when he saw people running in panic. After a 3-hour standoff, all 4 attackers are dead. Both attacks were carried out at symbolic locations, Iran's government and the tomb of Ayatollah Khomeini, a towering figure in Iran who led the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Iran's Revolutionary Guard is indirectly blaming Saudi Arabia for the attacks. The powerful military unit pointing out the attacks come after President Trump traveled to Saudi Arabia and encouraged Arab states to harden their position towards Iran. Tensions are already high between Saudi Arabia and Iran, who are battling for influence in the Middle East.
Much of the underlying tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran is religion. Saudi Arabia is majority Sunni Muslim, while Iran is majority Shiite Muslim. For decades, both countries have fought for influence in the Middle East. Lauren?
Why, what about ISIS? It is surprising to me that ISIS is attacking in Iran. Where does ISIS fall on the religious spectrum?
Well, ISIS is made up of Sunni extremists. So for years, they've targeted Shiite Muslims who are the minority in both Iraq and Syria. They view them as apostates, in addition to Christians, by the way. But ISIS doesn't limit themselves to Sunni or Shiite. They've carried out attacks against anyone, quite frankly, who doesn't follow their radical views on Islam.
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby at the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. A body is found in the River Thames in London. Police have been searching for a French man missing since the London Bridge terror attack. If confirmed, Xavier Thomas would be the 8th person killed in the vehicle and knife attack. Meanwhile, the family of a 39-year-old banker who used a skateboard to confront the attackers confirms he has died. Ignacio Echeverria was from Spain and worked in London. The Italian mother of one of the London Bridge attackers says her son became radicalized in Britain. Youssef Zagba's mother told reporters her son had dreams of moving to Syria to start a family. Investigators have named Zagba as one of the 3 terrorists police killed during Saturday's attack. While Europe has been struggling with terror attacks, Pope Francis is calling for a minute of peace tomorrow. Alan Holdren is the Rome bureau chief for Catholic News Agency. Alan, tell us what the Holy Father is planning.
Well, there's a 1 minute of prayer for peace initiative that's going to take place tomorrow at 1:00 p.m. Rome time. This is an initiative that came out of Argentina, is being picked up by a lot of individuals and Catholic organizations across the world as we speak. The Pope, during his general audience today, remembered back to 3 years ago when he invited the Israeli president then, Shimon Peres, and Mahmoud Abbas, the president of Palestine, together in the Vatican Gardens for a prayer for peace together. He said that still today there is so much need to pray for peace, and he invited people to do that whether you're Jewish, Muslim, or Christian. Lauren?
You were at that meeting in the Vatican Gardens in 2014. I can't believe that, and being there must have been quite something. What happened? What has come from that?
Well, these leaders came together with the Pope in the gardens with delegations from their specific states. We had rabbis there, we had imams there from the Muslim religion, and we had a lot of Catholic priests there, the first of which was Pope Francis. It was really a peaceful encounter. There was a lot of silence. There was prayer in each of the different rites in each of the different religions. What has come from that concretely up until this point is further dialogue. The Pope knows that if he's going to have any sort of concrete achievements for peace between nations, he needs to bring leaders together, and that's why that event took place. He's obviously still working on that, and the leaders are as well, but it's something that the Pope says takes a long time and takes small steps of diplomacy.
Well, the Vatican seems to be implementing this bolder brand of diplomacy. He was involved with the U.S.-Cuba détente. He's been instrumental in peace talks in Colombia. Is this Francis or the Vatican going back to historical roots as a major diplomatic player?
I think, Lauren, we can say that it's a little bit of both. Pope Francis has his own specific style of dealing with people, inviting people to dialogue, inviting people to the table to talk. Just last week, I was speaking with the president of the Korean Bishops' Conference,
yes,
and he wants the Pope to step in and help with North Korea.
Wonderful. That's a challenge. Alan Holdren, Rome bureau chief for Catholic News Agency. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Lauren.
For the 3rd time, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has filed a Supreme Court brief asking justices to uphold President Trump's immigration order. It would keep visitors from 6 mostly Muslim countries from entering the United States. This comes after the Department of Justice last week asked the Supreme Court to uphold the ban. Joining us now is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Welcome back to the program, sir.
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
You've been busy.
I have been busy.
Yes. Tell us why you decided to file an amicus brief with the Supreme Court.
So we thought it was important that the law play a part in this. We felt like the Ninth Circuit didn't focus on the law. They went out and looked at statements made in a political campaign, and we think they should focus on the law, which is very clear, giving the president authority to basically restrict entry of any class of non-resident aliens he views as detrimental, and so we wanted to support him, and we have obviously 15 other states with us.
Do you think that the U.S. Supreme Court, unlike the federal judges, will be more likely to side with the Trump administration?
I'm pretty confident that they'll actually look at the law, because if you look at what the Ninth Circuit has done with the Fourth Circuit, both known as very liberal courts, they went outside of looking at the actual language of the ban, and they went outside of looking at the actual law, and they looked at statements. That's not usually how you determine what the law is.
President Trump is getting a lot of flack for a tweet that he wrote about. That he said, you know, that what the Justice Department wrote to the Supreme Court was weak, and yes, it is a travel ban. Where do you fit in all of that?
So I can understand his emotional reaction to this because it is frustrating. We thought his original language in his executive order was fine.
And it was following the rule of the law.
Right, and so I understand his frustration. At the same time, it doesn't really matter what he says. What matters is what's the law, and he's correct on the law. That's what we care about. We're about the rule of law, and we're there to hopefully have the Supreme Court take a look at this and do the right thing.
You are on the front line of illegal immigration as the Attorney General of Texas. You have a lot going on. What are some of the arguments you present in this amicus brief that the Justice Department may not have mentioned?
So we're not there so much to present different arguments. We're there to support and give credibility to what they're saying because it kind of looks sometimes like they're out there alone, and we wanted to stand there and say, look, this is not crazy. This is actually what the law is. And there's a lot of other states that agree with us. And so we're lending our credibility of our state and all these other states too.
And your expertise.
Right. So, and I think, we have a good reputation. We've been successful in the courts. And we wanted to lend that credibility to what we think is good policy.
Later in the program, we're going to talk to Senator Luther Strange. He introduced a bill that's going to withhold federal funding for sanctuary cities. You have sanctuary cities in your state, is that right?
That's correct.
And I'm wondering, the sanctuary cities do not follow immigration law. They do not follow the rule of law. They're saying we don't have to deport illegal immigrants. Do you think that withholding, and he's going to withhold money, withhold money in this bill, taking it away from those cities, federal money, and moving it to the wall, moving that money to the wall. Do you think that that is going to work, is appropriate if the bill passes?
Sure. I mean, we're doing the same thing in Texas. We just passed a law in our legislature. The governor just signed it, basically defunding. We have certain penalties, and I think it's a great idea at the federal level as well. And I think the president with his executive order has already moved in that direction. Congress has already moved in that direction. This is just further amplification of what I think is really good policy.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining us, Attorney General Ken Paxton of Texas.
Thank you.
Coming up, the battle over immigration.
We can't pick and choose the laws we want to obey and laws we don't.
Senator Luther Strange of Alabama issues an ultimatum to sanctuary cities. And the source of hope.
È la sorgente della nostra speranza.
Pope Francis's message to pilgrims gathered at the Vatican today. The Department of Homeland Security says there are about 150 sanctuary cities. Those are communities which refuse to comply with federal immigration laws. Our next guest wants to hold them accountable. Joining us now is Senator Luther Strange of Alabama, native of Birmingham, who helped EWTN fight the HHS mandate requiring employers to provide contraception. Senator, welcome to the program.
I'm so glad to be on today. Thanks for having me.
The rule of law says cities have to comply with the Federal Illegal Immigration Reform Act. But sanctuary cities are refusing to do this. Tell us about your bill. What does it seek to do?
Well, along with colleagues in the Senate, we've introduced a bill that will require sanctuary cities, that is, cities that don't comply with the law, refuse to cooperate with police officers in reporting and holding on to illegal immigrants, particularly violent criminals, and are now preventing their own citizens from bidding on contracts to build the wall. Our bill would take that money and apply it to building the wall and would prevent the sanctuary cities from receiving funds if they're not going to follow the law.
So basically, you were a former state attorney general, and you know firsthand how important those federal infrastructure funding is for states. Give us some specifics about what would happen if your bill passed if the cities do not receive this federal money.
Well, we send a lot of infrastructure money to our states and our local communities. These are federal taxpayer dollars. And our bill is really about the rule of law. We're a nation of laws. The federal government's in charge of immigration policy. A law was passed. The president has promised to build a wall. The money's intended for that purpose. So our message to these sanctuary cities is you can't ignore the law and expect taxpayers to send you transportation dollars. If you're not going to comply with the law and follow it, then that money will be used to build the wall.
Why, very quickly we have to go, but why do these sanctuary cities think they don't have to follow the law?
You know, it's funny. I'm not really sure. I'm not sure whether they're still fighting the last election or whether or not they want to have their own policy, send some sort of a message. But this country is free. This country enjoys its liberties because we're a nation based on the rule of law. If you don't like the law, there's a way to change it through our great democratic system. That's how it should be done. But we can't pick and choose the laws we want to obey and the laws we don't.
Thank you very much. Senator Luther Strange of Alabama. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
In his general audience at the Vatican, Pope Francis says we can choose to live without God, but God can't live without us.
E questa certezza è la sorgente della nostra speranza.
The Holy Father says this is the source of our hope. When Christ taught his disciples the Our Father, the Pope says he taught us to speak to God as children. Francis made the remarks today in his weekly meeting with pilgrims in St. Peter's Square. Up next, advocates for religious freedom abroad and their vision for the world. And debating religious liberty, author Ryan Anderson joins me to discuss his new book. U.S. and Canada representatives are working together to advance religious protection around the globe.
Religious freedom does not protect a set of beliefs. It protects the people who advocate for those beliefs. And women around the world suffer greatly in places where there's no religious freedom.
I think it's important that people of faith have their voices heard in the public square so as to talk about how do we advance our common life? How do we build difference? How do we build our common life based on a recognition of difference?
Dr. Andrew Bennett was Canada's first ambassador for religious freedom and says it's important for the public to have knowledge of religion. He added it's key for countries the U.S. and Canada interacts with to have that same knowledge and respect. A new point-counterpoint book brings together a leading conservative voice and a gay rights advocate to debate same-sex marriage and religious liberty. The authors show that, yes, it is possible to have sharp disagreements and remain civil. Joining us now is Ryan Anderson, a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation and co-author of the new book, Debating Religious Liberty and Discrimination. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is a fabulous book. I was telling one of our board members actually the other day that I really enjoyed it.
Oh, great.
Enjoyed reading it. How did religious liberty become such a flashpoint?
That's a great question, and I think there are several different causes. One is just the decline in religiosity, the religious practice, a decline of religion's role in the public square. Another is the rise of the underlying disputed issues, contraception, abortion, the redefinition of marriage, now gender identity. I think those two forces, things that we disagree about going up, religious belief and practice going down, lead to the conflict.
Secularism, I think, is part of that. There's a section in the introduction of the book, let's put it up here, that explains basically your purpose of this book. The book is not only about about the law or the Constitution, it's about how everyday citizens should approach religious and moral diversity. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, what we try to get at in the book is we're a pluralistic nation. We're not a Catholic nation or an evangelical nation, a Mormon nation, a Muslim nation.
Or a puritanical nation, as we used to be, right?
As we used to be.
Yeah.
We're a diverse nation, and how do we live together while disagreeing about the nature of God, who God is, what God is, what God
and the role in government.
Us, the role of the state in regulating our lives. We're going to have to agree to disagree while creating space for people to lead their own lives in accordance with their beliefs about God and about the purpose of life.
You know, one of the things that I really liked about the book was that you each do your own bit, right? So John Corvino would write, and then you would write and explain sort of the rebuttal to all of this. And you talk a lot about the First Amendment Defense Act in here, and you also talk about the free exercise clause. Why is that so important?
Yeah, so what we try to do is we pick specific issues. Where are there disagreements? And one of them has arrived around the First Amendment Defense Act. This is a piece of federal legislation introduced in the last Congress that says, now that marriage has been redefined, we're not going to punish anyone who continues to believe the historic definition of marriage. It draws a bright line, and it says if you believe marriage is the union of a man and a woman, we're not going to deny your nonprofit tax status if you're a charity. We're not going to deny your accreditation if you're a school. We're not going to deny a government grant or a contract if you're a service provider. And so it says that we're going to respect both sides of this debate. Some people won a major Supreme Court case. They got marriage redefined. They're protected. The people who lost that case, we're not going to treat you as social pariahs. We're going to treat you as equal citizens who have a right to continue believing what you've always believed about marriage.
Thank you so much. I wish we had another hour to sit here and talk about this. It's absolutely fascinating and so timely. Ryan Anderson, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation and co-author of this, Religious Liberty and Debating Discrimination.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, happy birthday, Vice President Mike Pence. He turns 58, and his staff went all out to celebrate as he traveled to Houston. His deputy communications director passed out party hats on the press plane. But he did tell the reporters, you don't have to wear it. Vice President sent out this tweet saying, fun way to start a birthday. Thanks, team, for decorating Air Force 2. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Don't forget, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I'll see you again tomorrow. Good night, and God bless.